All right, here we're looking at our notes for section 7.4. And as always, we start with our learning targets. And one thing I want you to really start, what we're going to really do is we're going to write on our learning targets where we can find them in our notes, just to kind of help us. So today we're really just going to be factoring some polynomials and using the zero product property. So in my learning targets, I'm going to write that that's going to be in 7.4, so I can kind of refer back and forth to them. Okay, so let's find where we are at. So here we go. So we're going to really be factoring out the GCF, which is the greatest common factor. So the first thing is we're going to look at this in your sheet looks a lot like this, factoring polynomials. So we're going to fold it in half and take some notes on this front piece as well. So the first thing we want to look at is the zero product property. What the zero product property tells me is that if I multiply two things together and they equal 0, then I know that the first one equals 0, or the second one equals 0, or they both equal 0. It doesn't really matter. But this is my zero product property, and this is really going to come into play when we're solving these polynomials in our quadratics. Okay, so how we kind of use this zero product property when we're dealing with these polynomials. So the first thing is we know that our polynomial has to be in factored form. And a factored form means that it's written as a product, which is multiplying, of factors. And we're going to look at that. And that's what we're really doing these last several sections, is learning how to factor our polynomials. Okay, once they've been factored, then I set the whole thing equal to 0. So if I need to move things to the other side of the equation, I can do that as well, because everything must be multiplied together to equal 0. So then the third step to solving is I set each factor equal to 0 and I solve. So one thing I want you to notice is down here. Often you'll see the word solution, you might see the word root, and you might see the word intercept. Those three things mean the same thing. Okay? Intercepts, roots, and solutions. Oftentimes here we're going to talk about roots. That's just the same thing as solution, so we're still going to go ahead and solve it. So now let's look at actually factoring. How do I factor these polynomials? So here there's a couple of different possibilities. There's two different methods that get us to the same place. Okay, so the first one, and this is just the way that my brain kind of goes, and they really do the same thing. So first we have to list all the prime factors of each term. So when I'm looking at these polynomials and I'm finding the prime factors, it means what can I break it down to? So 5x cubed is my first term. So I know that my prime factors, 5 is a prime number, so I can't break it down anymore, times x, times x, times x. There's 3 x's, that's what that exponent tells me. My second term is 20x squared, so I need to factor out this 20. So what I did is I made a factor tree here, and I came up with two things that multiply to get 20, which I used 4 times 5. Well, 5 I know can't be broken down any further, but 4 can, because I know that 2 times 2 is 4. But then those are as far as I can go. So now I write all of those out. So I have 5 times 2 times 2, and I'm told here that I have 2 x's. Okay, so then my third term is at negative 15. So I factor that out, and I have a 5 times negative 3. The reason I use this positive 5 is because my other terms also have a positive 5. So now those are common. That's my common factor, right? So that's the only thing that's the same between all three of those terms. So if there was an x in each thing, that would also be common. But here in this example, there's not. So then I can multiply all those common things together to find my GCF, which is my greatest common factor. So now what I do is I divide each term, right? That's this step 4, is I divide each term by that greatest common factor. So I divide 5x cubed by 5. I divide 20x squared by 5. And I divide this negative 15 by 5. I can't forget that that 5 is still a piece of it that I factored out. Okay, so that's still a part of it all. So now this is in fully factored form. So now here's another example, and this is something that you are going to work through and show me the factored form of for this one. Okay, kind of the other method to get us still there is let's look at the greatest common factor of the coefficients. So right, coefficients are the numbers with our variables. So my coefficients would be 5, 20, and negative 15. So I want to find the common factor between all of those. What is the largest thing that can divide evenly into all of those? And that's 5. Then I want to find the smallest degree. So the degree is the variable, the sum of the exponents of the variables. So here this is a third degree, this is a degree of 2, and this has a degree of 0 because I don't have any variables here. So that's my smallest degree, so I know that my greatest common factor is just that 5. So then again I divide each term by that greatest common factor, and I can rewrite it out. So you see I've done the same thing here, just sometimes it can be easier to actually list out all of your factors, especially if you're going to have lots of different variables as well. So again, you've got this other example, and I want you to kind of do this one as well. It doesn't matter to me with this example which way you do it. As long as you pick one method and go for it, that's all that really matters. Okay, so now that we've looked at that, that's really it for 7.4, is learning how to factor these different things and then use your zero product property. So now I want to look at just a little example of kind of what you're going to be looking at and what you're being asked to do in this section. So I'm just going to use the very back page of my notebook to give us an example of what we're looking at. So for example, if we have, it'll say the word solve, right? And solving means get the variable all by itself. So 2x squared plus 4x equals 0. So I know that I can't actually solve this using my zero product property yet because I'm not multiplying things. And that was one of those rules that we had to follow when using the zero product property. So the first thing I have to do is I have to factor this out. So I want to find all of my common terms that I can factor out. So let's just go ahead and factor each piece. So for this first term, my value, my coefficient would be 2, and I have 2 x's. For my second term in here, I know that that is 2 times 2 times x, because I only have 1 x. So now I'm going to circle the things that are the same between them. And that gives me, when I multiply those together, I end up with 2x. That's what I've factored out. And I'm left with x plus 2. Okay, because that's what's left in my top row, and the 2 is what's left in my bottom row, equals 0. So now I have two things that are being multiplied, and they're set equal to 0. That's the second piece, is I have to make sure they're set to 0. So now I can use my zero product property. So I have 2x equals 0, and I have x plus 2 equals 0. Set them both equal to 0 and solve. So to do that, I divide by 2. So I end up with x equals 0. And here to undo this addition, I subtract. And I end up with x equals negative 2. So these are my two different solutions that will satisfy this equation. Okay, so this is just an example of how we had to use both our factoring and also our zero product property to solve it. Okay, so that's really what all we're learning today, is how to do both of those things. We're going to start to look at a couple more complex things and complex ways to factor in our next lesson. So for now, go ahead and work on your homework and contact me whenever you get stuck.